Every day, season 2 is here now. Rand's paying rent with favors to Selene. I don't think that's gonna go his way. Hey, hey. Well, here we are, strangers and friends. Episode 2 of season 2. Woohoo! Did you know something was seriously wrong the moment Selene spoke for the first time? Especially if you're not a book reader. If you're not a book reader, I hope that you're not listening to me if you're planning to start reading the books, because I'm going to spoil so many things by doing these deep dives. If you're not going to read the books, you might just enjoy finding out a bit more depth about what's going on in the show, but there could be some actual real plot spoilers for what comes up ahead. So in today's video, we get to unpack our first look at Selene in the show, and there are voices in Rand's head. I think you're going to love the comparison of how Rand meets Selene here and all the differences and parallels to where Rand is at geographically and emotionally in the books. So, are you ready? Here we go. Season 2, Episode 2. I'm Koala Sedai, and I'm just loving breaking down Season 2 of The Wheel of Time scene by scene and sharing it with you. I'm going to examine the entire cold open together here in this episode. So that covers Rand's dream, his first conversation with Selene, his commute to work, a look at where he's working, and just a little bit about the state of his mental health. That's actually a lot. The first thing that we see in this cold open is this dream where Rand is looking in horror at his hands covered in blood. There's a fire burning in front of him and he's sitting on the ground. Things move a little jerkily, which is another good clue, of course, that it's a dream. He picks up his heron-marked sword, which is also covered in blood, and looking down he sees Nynaeve on the ground, face down, and a huge sword wound opening up in her back. Then there's this really quick flash of him in his coat with the large stitching on it, and then it's back to him in the dream. Next he sees Perrin on the ground with his throat cut, and another flash of him in that other coat, and these are like him seeing himself in that coat during the actual killings happening. Now Matt's on the ground with his left eye gone, as though the sword went right through it, and boom, another flash of Rand. The flashes of Rand remind me of when he attacks that jerk that works at the asylum, but I'll talk about that again when we get to it in another episode. And lastly, he rolls Egwene onto her back, and it can be presumed that she was killed with a sword to the back too. Rand collapses to the ground in tears. Ishamael appears in a flash and then dissipates in his Tel'aran'rhiod way. I don't know that Rand is even aware that Ishi is there. We immediately move then to Rand standing at the window to Selene's room, and he's just looking out, staring at, obviously recounting that dream rather than actually looking out at the streets below. And his facial acting is beautiful because he's standing there and holding himself so still. You can tell that he's had a terrible type of trauma just from having that dream. And this is when Selene wakes and she asks, "Rand, another nightmare?" So Selene's aware that Rand's having nightmare, but what I noticed on my very first watch that he replies, "No." Now in the books, of course, the boys didn't want to tell Moraine about their Ishi dreams, and here we open with Rand not wanting to tell Selene about them. And he says immediately, "I should get to work." There's some really interesting ways that Selene in the show is almost trying to take on some of the roles that Moraine should have with Rand. And again, I'll talk about that more when I get to those parts in different episodes. But it's quite fascinating the way the show rolls and flips and morphs these concepts about to give us a lot of the same things happening, but in some very different ways. Now, the show dreams have been quite different to the book dreams. However, what I notice is that both have elements of horror, and particularly body horror, in them. In the books, the horror is more from Ishi monologuing as Baalzamon with all his "serve me or die" stuff. And, it kind of reads okay, but it really wouldn't have translated well on screen. And yes, there are many conversations about how it doesn't even always read okay, but that's all right. I don't want to get too deeply into those book dreams, but just enough to be thinking about, in the books, Baalzamon, who we then found out was Ishamael, not the Dark One, was doing all this dream stuff with the boys. And here we can see that it is happening. We just bypassed having to sort out Baalzamon as a name as compared to the Dark One, as compared to Ishamael, etc. And I think that actually worked really well on screen. We got enough elements in season 1 of the Baalzamon type Ishamael with the Fire Eyes image, jump scaring in dreams, and usually just kind of flashing in and flashing out, which I felt was more creepy than us having to sort of look at trying to depict that particular entity for too long a period of time. And we certainly didn't get all that sort of carry on monologuing. Then in episode 8, we get that amazing instance where Ishi pushes the arrow through that fiery eye, and that whole face, and therefore that whole persona just kind of peels off. And we get a much scarier monologue from Ishamael as himself in the show. But now we get Rand finding his best friends dead, and not only are his hand and sword covered in the blood, but he gets those intense little flashes of memory, and is having to face that it is inevitable that he will kill them. Now, does that mean it truly is inevitable that he will? Well, we're going to have to waffo, but it feels inevitable to him with what he knows so far about both men he can channel and lose Therum and Telamon. He believes that if he doesn't separate himself from everybody he loves, he will kill them. So I found this really interesting because he ran away from them physically, left them thinking he was dead, and has been living apart from them for 6 months or more, and yet he is still ripe for Ishi to torture him with this theme, and not just once, but repeatedly. Now, it's interesting because I had to watch the whole season a couple of times to really grasp just where Rand was at in these opening scenes. It didn't grab me straight away. I felt that he already didn't really trust Selene in my first watching, and even my second watching, I was still trying to work through that. I was thinking that maybe he wasn't even really taken by her, and his retorts that her rates are too steep for him already are one of the things that made me think that. She replies to him, "All these nights together, and it's always the same ending." So, okay, exactly what is going on here? Rand fled the eye of the world because he feared that he would go mad and kill those he loves. He asked Moraine to tell everybody that he was dead. Ishmael is playing on that fear by tormenting him with these dreams, and we can guess that this is happening night after night. And Ishmael is doing that because he's ensuring that Rand doesn't relent and go back to find his friends. Here he is, he's in Cairhien, hoping to find a way to get in to work with Lagain so that he can get some training that he hopes will stop the madness. And I don't even know why he got that into his head, but anyway, he's met Selene, and while he is sleeping with her, he is working really hard not to let her too close. And that's what had me a little confused in the beginning. It wasn't that he didn't care for her and wasn't being drawn into by her. He was trying not to let that happen. He's trying to keep the relationship on the level of a business deal, friends with benefits, and he wants her to seem to benefit more than he, so that he won't hurt her when the madness takes him, because he's not the one that's being, falling in love with her or feeling too close to her. We soon see in this episode that he's hearing voices, and they aren't saying, "Isn't it a fine day to be alive?" In the books, we read so much internal POV of Rand that we're quite intimately walking through his story. So the use of that body horror in this dream, seeing the evidence with scraps of memory that he is a killer, is so much more horrifying than watching rats have their backs broken or ravens peck your eyes out, and that is all body horror. But there's little worse than the horror of believing that you are the monster. So finally, after however many rewatches, I find now that his responses to Selene make complete sense. He's holding himself aloof from her, well, trying to, so that she won't become another loved one that he kills. It's interesting that he's not seeing her in his dreams being killed. A later episode, when he admits he loves her, is where I finally made sense of what we see here, and I'll bring that back up when we finally get to that point. Selene, of course, is just waiting for that morning when he wakes beside her still in the bed and swears undying love. Instead, it always ends with him tormented, despite the fact that she tells him later that she's shielding him from Ishi. So it always ends, in fact, with him tormented, out of bed, back with his walls up, and leaving without any affection, let alone love. I really love this Rand-Selene relationship so much better than being dumped in a weird way into a mirror world and her making him shoot all the Grom in an attempt to make him channel. Oh, wait, no. We'll compare that particular scene a bit later down the track too. Still, this Selene is more composed and believable, and the real nutcase Lanfear is waiting just below the surface. When Rand meets Selene in the books, he's travelling with the Shinaran soldiers, including Ingtar, Loyal, Mat and Perrin, as they begin the hunt for the horn all together. They have Huron with them, who is the sniffer from Faldara, tracking the horn with them, instead of in the show, Perrin and Loyal are with Ingtar and the Shinarans, and they're using Elias to take the place of the sniffer because it gives Elias a larger role, and it actually helps us introduce a lot more of the concepts of what's happening to Perrin rather than having Huron doing that. So instead of that, of course, Matt is in the White Tower being held captive by Leandrin, and Rand is already in Cairhien instead of heading towards Cairhien with Selene. So in the books, one night Rand sleeps beside a portal stone and wakes up with Loyal, Huron and their horses in a mirror world, and they meet Selene there. Now, I'm going to just take a moment to sort of talk about that, and this is part of the reason why I'm actually glad they didn't do any of this in the show. Firstly, I've never been able to quite work that scene out because I've read lots of discussions that have happened over the years, and I ended up coming to the conclusion that I'm pretty certain that Selene actually transported them through that portal stone the first time. Although I've never quite figured out why she would bring Huron and Loyal too. I just have never felt that it's a plausible thing that Rand accidentally activated the portal stones in his sleep. It just I don't know, it just doesn't sit with me. And so the fact that nobody can really quite agree on exactly what happened there, and it just became another one of those early book things that probably RJ sort of dumped and went a different way with, it was wise just not to bring it into the show at all. There's lots of discussions and theories around this that you can search online. Now, one suggests that Lanfear was actually with the party from Faldara using a mask of mirrors and took this opportunity to get Rand apart from the party. I'm not so sure that that's true because there was only about 20 of them. So it would have been pretty hard for her to act the part of a Shanaran soldier that they would have all known. So maybe she was following them and simply took Rand through in the night. But the thing is, Lanfear could travel. So she could have just turned up, grabbed him, taken him through in the middle of the night. So my take on this, which is certainly not set in stone, there are some things I'm quite, die on that hill. This one is really shaky ground. So maybe she brought Huron so that the party would lose their sniffer and may not even keep up the search or be able to keep up the search by losing him, and therefore she could really whisk Rand off and find the horn, and get all the glory, blah-de-blah-de-blah. But why Loyal was taken is something I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. If you're a book reader and you have thought a lot about that particular scene in the books, please do comment below about that, because I spiral into it a bit and then I kind of go, you know what, nobody ever really quite figured it out, so then I run away again. So we won't get too bogged down in those things. RJ really took the first 3 books to get his metaphysics decided. So we'll have to circle back to this first trip through the Portal Stone whenever I get finally up to episode 8 and the breakdown, because the show has done this amazing job of weaving important concepts from one scene in the book into a whole range of scenes within the show, taking the important concept and weaving a very new pattern. In the books, we get Selene attempting to get Rand to side with her and even seduce him. Interestingly, they are nearly at Cairhien when Selene disappears, as she doesn't want to go into the inner city there. Rand believes they'll be safe behind those city walls and they'll find the rest of the party again. He's determined to find both the horn and the dagger, and Selene wants him to just grab the horn and leave and be with her. So I love that in the books they're heading to Cairhien and Selene leaves him, and then in the show they're in Cairhien and there is Selene with him. However, of course, she's living in the Foregate, which makes perfect sense. It would be, with the way Deus Damar works, Selene infiltrating the inner city of Cairhien would not have made sense. But it's like this great twist on the book, as Rand isn't hunting for the horn or the dagger anyway. Selene can't do what we had in the books, as she doesn't need to distract him from that particular mission. She just needs to keep him there. However, it is really obvious that she does want him to channel, so that he has to proclaim himself to her so that she can then attempt to show him land fear and take him off. Okay, again, we'll get to that when we get to episode 8. Now, there's another thing about Selene in the books, that it was quite obvious that she would enamour people, even the Ogier, to her as being the most beautiful woman they'd ever seen. Huron and Loyal were just smitten with her as Rand the minute they got into close proximity to her and if she gave them any attention. For us as readers, it made her malevolence as obvious as her overplaying the damsel in distress role. In the show, for those who hadn't read the books, really, they didn't know what to make of Selene in those opening scenes. While many had an uneasy feeling about her within a fairly short time, there was nothing they could really point to and say, this is what's wrong. So the beautiful, subtle work in the writing and acting of the show is creating many more beautiful layers of nuance there. I have a theory that we can see her doing this same enamouring thing, which is almost a type of compulsion, from this first scene in the show. So in the books, Lanfear also used a mild mask of mirrors to appear younger, and I've heard it said that Lanfear wears low-grade worship and trust compulsion like other women wear makeup. I love that line. And I mean, why would Loyal even think she was so incredibly beautiful when he is from another species, and the Ogier idea of beauty has some pretty weird ties to tufted ears and what the woman can do with them? In the show, you'll notice that Selene, even in this opening scene, will place her hand on Rand's chest and gently just wiggle slightly or tap a couple of fingers. I like the idea that she's trying to nudge him towards the adoration she wants from him. She actually wants him to adore and love her without any influence, but I don't think she can quite help herself from trying to nudge him at the same time, just like Selene made amazing attempts that were way more overt at trying to seduce Rand into following her. It doesn't seem to really work. He's too strong already, or he's so determined to keep his walls up so that he doesn't put her in danger that he resists it. The interesting thing is that in the book, Rand also is able to resist a lot of Selene's attempts at drawing him right in. So in the books, Rand has tried to push all his friends away. But when Fane steals the horn and the dagger, he elects to go with them because he's so concerned about Mat. He has totally pissed Mat off to a royal degree, and Perrin wants to see them all friends again but takes Mat's side. And this is why they don't end up going on the Portal Stone journey with Rand, because they're sleeping a long way away from him. Mat even uses the excuse that they don't want to be killed in the night if he accidentally channels in his sleep. Interesting, hey? So, in the books, while Rand is travelling with the Shinaran group, he is emotionally disconnected from them. Remember, he already has the red coat and all the new clothes as well, and that dragon banner with him. And he feels bad for how he treated his friends, but he still wants to keep a wall between them because of his fear of hurting those that he loves, even though he doesn't want them to have the shits with him. So, same, different on the surface. I saw a beautiful interview with Yosha about season 2, and he talks in that interview about the depth of character knowledge he got from reading the books. He comments that because he knew Rand well, he didn't even have to think in order to simply ad-lib and throw those coins to the young beggar boy, because that's just what Rand would do. Now, I want you to notice that in that scene, that's the coat that he's wearing in the little flashback bits during his dream when he's seeing himself being violent to his friends. I literally gave a little squeal when I saw that unfold, that little tossing of the coins, because it was such an incidental moment that showed us so much about the person Rand al'Thor is. Maybe I would have even missed it had I not heard that interview. And so I love the way the very next thing happens. We see a street vendor sees him, calls a good morning, and tosses a tortilla or something similar to him as he walks by. Now, no money is exchanged, so does he have an account with that vendor? Or is he simply known and liked that much? Or Taviran? I love the way we get filled right in on a lot of things about Cairhien and Rand's situation, just in this really short experience of walking to work with him that morning. So firstly, he gets to the gates that separate the Foregate from the city. And did you notice that the guard at the gates who checks Rand's documents is the very guard Moraine asks about Rand later? So Rand has been living here for months and coming through these gates to work for months too. Therefore, this guard would know his face well. As Rand wends down the alleyways, we get some nice glimpses of the outer areas of the city where the houses are stone and the women are currently wearing blue and white with wide skirts. The men are typically dressed in dark clothes, and we see that women are confident to walk alone or in pairs without men, as often as they're walking in the company of men. Rand hangs up his personal coat and dons a work coat, which seems to be the only formal part of a uniform there. As he's walking down the corridor, it's quickly apparent that he's working in some kind of a sanatorium. We've got the visuals of seeing inside some rooms and also the sounds of screaming and things that we can hear in the background. And every moment in this cold open has been new information, and just as it seems that his day life looks okay, like a woman, money you can give away to the poor, breakfast for free, and a job, a strangely faint voice echoes in his head. Do you hear me? You're mine, Rand al'Thor. Okay, buddy, we're not doing so well at all. Not even when fully awake. Now, the interesting thing about this voice is that isn't Lews Theron talking to Rand. It seems to me like it's really an echo of what we know is said to book Rand in his dreams by Baalzamon. So I feel that this represents a number of serious situations. Is the voice part of the taint madness, or is Ishi messing with Rand even when he's awake? It's a wonderful way of pulling back in that part of how Baalzamon messes with Rand, but not overdoing it like I sometimes felt the book did. And don't get me wrong, I love the book, but I would sort of think, oh my God, this goes on and on. So just that faint bit of it there is like, okay, Rand is having as much shit happen to him as Book Rand had happening. So we'll bring that back into focus when we get there, but other times so far in the show and in times to come, we've heard voices, and so far they've been part of the taint madness, but that just doesn't quite ring to me like what's happening. So it's a great way to give us a bunch of new information and answer the question from episode 1, where is Rand? While leaving us completely confused as to what's happening with him at the same time. The sanatorium certainly gave all book readers a surprise. we'd never even heard of this kind of facility being anywhere in Randland as book readers. So we had no clues that could be a possibility. There's lots of interesting things to unpack about the use of this place and the characters that we're going to meet there as we keep going. But for now, we know Selene owns an inn in the Foregate and Rand's paying his rent in her bed. We know that Ishi is still plaguing him with body horror dreams that fill him with a fear that he's going to kill all he loves. Rand doesn't want to discuss his dreams with Selene, and in fact, while he's with her, he's holding himself back from her as much as he can. Rand still seems so far out of his depth as a country lad who's found himself in the midst of a city and all that's happening to him. And he works in a sanatorium while hearing voices in his own head. I really hope that you've enjoyed this breakdown of the episode 2 cold open for season 2. Did I miss anything? Is there something you notice going on there that harps back to, reflects, or is even a flip on something that happened in the books that I didn't catch? I'd love to know anything else you can see in this, as well as anything that you would like to comment about and reflect on what you've noticed or what you started to think about while listening to my breakdown. So please do take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this out by all means. Comment away. I love hearing your thoughts. I'm Koala Sedai, and I'll be back with more as soon as I can. This one took a bit longer to come out. I've had a grandchild born in my house since I did the last episode, and that is really throwing a spanner in the works of how much can we get done in one day. Whew, not a lot. That's all I can say. Thanks for watching.